And you're good.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We are here today to present you our exhibit titled The History Between Technology and Gambling from 1850 to 2021, an investigation into how information improves decision-making. The intersection between society and gambling has not always been the most peaceful of marriages. At different points in our nation's history, gambling has been seen in many different lights and has existed in many forms. One appropriate quote that properly encapsulates the American relationship with gambling is from David G. Schwartz in his book, Roll on the Bones, The History of Gambling. Like so many of the characters that have famously engaged in gambling, the activity itself has always had the reputation of being roguish, seldom respected and accepted in proper circles, but nonetheless too intriguing and visible to be ignored. And like the bastard nephew who shows up at the family weddings and demands to sit at the bridegroom's table at the reception dinner, gambling continues to push for a respected position at the table. But as history has illustrated time and time again, the activity can continue to shock and titillate from generation to generation, regardless of legal status. Schwartz is correct in his assessment, or at least is correct about what gambling used to be. The old days of gambling were dominated by the odds makers, those with inside knowledge and the ability to manipulate the markets or even the events themselves to ensure maximum profitability. As this course has shown us, all industries are affected and shaped by continuities and disruptions. The syllabus states that there is no such thing as an information revolution, and this is a course about it. In gambling, there absolutely was an information revolution. The introduction and adoption of technology in the gambling industry disrupted and eventually did away with the power that select individuals had and created an accessible and data-backed product that is now modern gambling. The story of technology in gambling is one of disruption. The artifacts on display today will show that it has been the technological advancements that have shifted the Overton window on gambling in the United States. It is important to understand and focus on how this wealth of information that the internet and modern data collection has made available has allowed gambling, a once seedy vice sequestered to the dark corners of society, to emerge as a legitimate, legal, and celebrated American pastime. This exhibit seeks to explore and inform, creating a timeline of how technological advancements have improved the accessibility of gambling. Section 1 will include Artifact 1 and 2 about gambling and its perception in the 1850s, as well as hardware advances in gambling. Section 2, Artifacts 3 and 4, will include the proliferation of information symmetry and the collection of information in gambling. Section 3, Artifacts 5 and 6, will talk about the move to online gambling and creating an equal playing field for all gamblers. Section 4, Artifacts 7 and 8, will talk about the legalization and acceptance of online gambling in the US, as well as the next frontier for digital gambling. And with that, I pass it off for our first artifact.
Thanks, Alec. So to get into our first artifact, we're going to be talking about a little bit about how gambling was perceived in the 1850s. You see, gambling was available only through analog venues, such as card games, horse races, and prize fights. There wasn't a concept of online gambling at this point. The public, well, they took to gambling. Events such as the California Gold Rush in 1848 spurred gambling and made it prolific throughout the country. However, unfortunately, the government's view on gambling was more bearish. This is because often it was said that gambling led to fraudulent and dishonest behavior from people. And as you can see in artifact number 1, states such as New York established the New York Association for Suppression of Gambling. These organizations focused to curb what was now a major endemic of gambling in the country. So one quote that we picked out from the Constitution and bylaws of the New York Association was that they quite literally acted to make sure that persons known to visit gambling houses and to bet money therein shall be warned and admonished. Now let's move on to artifact 2.
Thank you. So artifact 2 is going to be looking at the more tangible impacts of technology on gambling hardware. Now, technology and gambling are tied together in many ways that are difficult to see. But when looking for a more tangible impact of the improved technology, one needs to look no further than the history of the slot machine. Introduced in the 1890s as a way to play poker, the idea of a slot machine is comparatively young when looking at the whole history of gambling, so it makes it perfect for a timeline like this. Now, the first picture we have in the top left is 1891, where men named Stitman and Pitt created the first gambling machine in Brooklyn, New York. It was used to play poker and had 5 drums and 50 cards. Moving on to 1895, and Charles IV invented the first true slot machine called the Liberty Bell. Wildly popular with the California Gold Rush, this machine consisted of 3 reels, a lever, and automatic payouts to give to winning players. This was the first machine with automatic payouts and changed the game for slot machines. In 1905, Herbert Mills invented another version of the Liberty Bell called the Operator's Bell, which was the first slot machine to have the famous fruit symbols on its wheels. Now moving on to 1964, when Bally Technologies created the first electromechanical slot machine called the Money Honey. This was the first one to come with lights and sounds to entice players. In 1975, Wally Fraley invented the first fully electric slot machine called the Fortune Coin, featuring for the first time virtual slot reels and a video screen. In 1994, video slot machines become widely available online for the first time. This has allowed gamblers to play at home from their PCs. The earliest example of this was something called Intercasino. And moving on, in 2012, Caesars, one of the biggest names in gambling, launched its own casino application and released a downloadable phone app the year later for slot machines. Now, the original mechanical slot machines that we talked about with 1895 and 1905 created unpredictable outcomes. The issue with the original slot machine models was the imperfections with mechanical randomization. The initial conditions of the machines before the player was to play would alter the odds of certain results. This meant odds of a jackpot would not remain constant, but would improve or worsen in different periods. It wasn't until the introduction of the electronic slot machine that the gambling industry was able to fix this problem. Electronic slot machines use random number generator technology that creates perfect randomization regardless of prior spins. I'll now pass it off to Artifact 3.
So next we get into a little bit of the Simulatics Corporation and how they're using past data to inform current decisions. This artifact is a video, so we'll encourage you to watch that video in your own time. But for now, Alec can explain what our thesis was.
Yeah, so if we look at the video of the Simulatics Corporation and how they used past data to inform current decisions, it ties along very well with gambling. Gambling itself is a game of prediction. Betting on which horse will win a race does require skill and knowing the conditions of the track, the pedigree of the horse, and the competition in the race. But even so, you are still predicting an outcome on an event that has seemingly endless amounts of variables. Now, the best way to counteract those odds is by looking at past data to inform future outcomes. This idea seems incredibly basic, but it has been technological advances that have allowed for it to be adopted within the world of gambling. Using the horse racing example, a bettor today can go online and look at every past result the horse they are betting on has, and can see how the horse performed in certain areas or certain tracks, what weather conditions they like or dislike. Before the idea of looking at past data to inform future data was in gambling, this technology was actually first introduced and put to the test in one of the highest stakes gambles in our country, the presidential election. Now, this artifact and this exhibit shows a video from November 4th, 1952, where the Univac computer was used past voting data to correctly and astonishingly accurately predict the outcome of the presidential election between Stevenson, and Eisenhower. Now, this cutting-edge technology knew the presidential election that had been billed to be a toss-up, but knew that it would be a landslide. While we don't know if anyone was gambling on the results that night, we do know that the technology inspired the predictive data that is so prevalent in the world of gambling today. Academics and researchers have continued to investigate and write about the connection between politics, technology, and betting. And according to Economica, the growth of gambling and prediction markets, economic and financial implications, quote, a significant amount of this research effort has to date been focused on the value of these markets in predicting the outcome of political elections. So while it's being used in gambling, it's also being used in politics. Now we'll pass it off to Artifact 4.
Yeah, so moving on, data collection and player profiling in modern casinos has become big business for these gambling operations. You see, when you step into a casino, there are many things that can track everything you do, whether it be an electronic slot machine deciding what your betting patterns are, or RFID sensors in gaming chips, targeting what your favorite games are. And lastly, and maybe most importantly, these loyalty programs that offer targeted comps to high value customers. All of these things are made to collect data on their players. As you can see in artifact number 4, whether you be on the gaming floor or just looking to enjoy casino hospitality options, the game control center is always watching what you're doing and understanding you as a player. So we've decided that this is incredibly similar to the data collection found in modern day social media and modern day big tech companies. Companies like Amazon, Google, and Facebook are all collecting your data to give you targeted ads, things that you will click on and things that will relate to you more personally. Similarly, casinos can give targeted promotions to their customers in order to increase customer attention and get you coming back. This is just one more way that information and information collection is seeping into the gambling world. Moving on to artifact number 5, we're seeing a rise in online gambling. You see, online gambling has created essentially a much lower barrier of entry for players to play. No longer do you have to travel and go directly to a casino to find a place to gamble. And the lower bets and lower minimum bets are reducing overall cost and capital need for these players. For example, in poker in a live casino or in an in-person casino, you need about $200 to $300 to play the lowest stakes games. But online, 95% of players play with $16. It's an insane amount, an insane lower amount of capital needed to play online. The largest online gambling site is DraftKings.com. It has 16% of the US online casino gross gaming revenue market share. You see, online gambling websites have made casino style gaming more accessible, and ads such as the one that we're showing right here make that clear. In this ad, you can see that $100,000 worth of free play is available to players who join DraftKings. This means that players have the chance to try online gambling without putting any equity up. This is what we attribute to the rise of online gambling. Moving on, I'll pass it to Alex to talk about Artifact 6.
Thank you for that. Well, as we look on to Artifact 6 and the rise of universal information for all players across gambling platforms, it's always helpful to look at the impact that technology has on industries by looking at industry leaders and what they have to say. In 1996, Bill Gates gave an interview where he spoke about the interactive network being the ultimate market, where every buyer would be able to make fully informed decisions and society's resources would be distributed evenly. Gates believed the internet will extend the electronic marketplace and will be the ultimate go-between, the universal middleman. This interview was the birth of the term frictionless commerce, but these same principles can be applied to the world of gambling. The internet has made occupations like bookies obsolete and has allowed internet gamblers instant access to games and bets that they could only play or make in a brick and mortar institution previously. This has made gambling easier, but also allows for the gambling world to operate more freely, and fewer regulations have a potential for negative effects as well. The book Technological Forecasting and Social Change mentions this phenomenon. Frictionless gambling has made gambling easier, more accessible, but, quote, the digital consumption experience provides users the opportunity to engage discreetly in behaviors that are controlled and monitored by social environments when delivered in the brick and mortar format. And continuing from this, there's much research being done today about the potential for increased rates of addiction from online gatherings rather than in person. Now, the utopian ideas that Gates put forward in his interview about the benefits of e-commerce aren't lies. Online shoppers are more informed and more confident in their purchases than ever before. When looking at the same technology as it applies to gambling, there's certainly positives. Gamblers know more than they ever have and have access to this data, and that's incredible. But negatives come along with it as well, as gambling recedes to being behind a screen rather than in person. I'll now pass it off to Artifact 7.
Awesome. So as we've seen, there is this shift in power with online gambling. So online gambling can be positive because of the information symmetry given to all players, but also it can bring out the worst part of humans in that they're no longer being checked in a in-person social environment. And we think that legislation surrounding online gambling and sports betting in the United States has kind of mirrored this. So in 2006, we saw the passing of the Unlawful Internet Gambling Enforcement Act of 2006. This meant essentially that players were prohibited from using any kind of credit card, ACH transfer, wire transfer, or bill payment to participate in any kind of illegal gambling. It also set up enforcement acts or penalties for players who acted in such ways. These were quite severe. This was a major blow for online gambling. And it wasn't until 2011 when the Department of Justice amended the Wire Act of 1961 was gambling, casino games, online, such as poker, blackjack, etc., finally allowed in the United States. This, unfortunately, however, in 2011, did not allow what might be online gambling's biggest um, section, that being sports betting. You see, sports betting in today's world, about 80% of all transactions happen online, compared to just 20% in person. But it wasn't until 2018 that the Supreme Court decided to repeal the nationwide sports betting ban. And we've slowly seen these repeals get spread across the United States. For example, in 2021, this year, in April, New York State finally legalized online sports betting. And now that due to the Supreme Court's ruling, states are now allowed to choose whether or not to allow online betting on an individual basis. We've seen many more states follow New York's lead. Now for Artifact 8.
Thank you for that. So as our presentation comes to a close, it is just as important to look at and acknowledge the future of gambling as much as it is to speak about how we've gotten here. Since its invention in 2009 with Bitcoin, cryptocurrency has become the new wave in investing. But the reality is that it is as much gambling as placing a bet on a football game. Cryptocurrency trading, especially on smaller, less well-known coins, is extremely volatile and relies on the individual buying and selling to have an innate belief that a certain coin will do well on a given day. These individuals are not investors, they are gamblers. The book Addictive Behaviors describes this market as often characterized by speculation and day trading that appear to have many similarities to gambling. Such activities can often involve gambling on risky, volatile coins with limited information with short-term profit horizons and a greater focus on the flows of trading activity rather than consideration of the long-term fundamentals. As we can see here, the artifact is actually a screenshot of Jake Paul, who is telling his many followers to go buy his own crypto coin, Safe Moon, which is certainly not an actually informed purchase, but something that a celebrity and someone who has influence is just telling his followers to do. The story of gambling that our exhibits have told thus far is the improved access to data, allowing for more informed decision-making in betting. But crypto prospecting and following the ideas of someone like Jake Paul is built on hype and celebrity tweets rather than any concrete reasoning. For that reason, this is absolutely the new frontier, but it needs to be regulated and it needs to be discussed about how you can actually make an informed decision rather than a risky and volatile one. As we move on, we can come to our conclusion. Now, this presentation sought to tell a story, the story of changes and disruptions in the gambling industry that permanently altered the way individuals, both bettors and non-bettors, viewed a once seedy industry into a sector with reliant and indisputable facts. Our artifacts, whether it was a Supreme Court decision or a tweet from Jake Paul, build a timeline of where gambling has been, what it is now, and where it will be in the future. Drawing from scholarly sources allowed these artifacts to be backed with historical facts and details from the brilliant men and women dedicated to telling the story of gambling and technology. Gambling was once a fool's errand, with rigged events, unfair odds, and little to no information provided from those who had it. But technology changed all that. And that's what we really want you all to understand. While the information provided in these exhibits is all equally important on their own, it's even more impactful to see them as linked, to tell the broader story of gambling, information, and technology. Technology has provided everyone around the world with effectively limitless information, and gambling and gamblers have used all the information they can to improve their odds of winning. Thank you for listening to our presentation.